You are listening to Earn Your Stripes, presented by Cardinal Spirits.
Welcome to another episode of Earn Your Stripes. I'm Max Bielfeld here with Justin Albers. Before we get started today, we just want to say thank you to our sponsors, 10th and College, who I actually had a chance to live there for my 1 year at Indiana. Great living space. It's on 10th Street and College, if you couldn't tell by the name. So go check them out. They're taking leases right now. Now we're going to hop into the listener questions that we've received. And Justin, you want to go ahead and hit the first question?
Yeah, Max, I'll go ahead and do that. Reminder to everyone to send any questions you have, IU basketball, sports related or not, just send them our way, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can each Tuesday. The first question this week is from Jade Ritter. He asked for thoughts and opinions on multi-class basketball in the state of Indiana versus when it used to be single class. And I'll go ahead and weigh in on that first. I wasn't actually around when it was single class. I've heard my dad and some of the older generation talk about what it was like to have a single class of basketball. And I certainly understand why they went to the multi-class. It seems more fair on paper because the size of the school certainly does matter. But what you've seen with a lot of the smaller size schools, Park Tudor, I'll use as an example, a private school that you pay tuition to go there. They tend to recruit, and then they end up with the best team, by far the best team in that lower class. And it'd be nice to see that team go against a 4A basketball powerhouse. And so it's unfortunate that it's not that way. If I had to choose between a single class and multi-class, I would definitely choose a single class, but I do understand the purpose of it. I think it could be redone a little bit. I think you could probably narrow it down to maybe 2 classes instead of 4 as it is right now. But I think that could be done in the future. It's a work in progress. A lot of people have problems with the 4-class system in Indiana and a lot of states, and I get it. And I think one solution would be to cut it from 4 to 2, and that would be a lot better than 4. But I am a guy that's in favor of one champion. I don't like having 4 state champions from boys basketball every year in the state of Indiana, so it would be nice to be able to narrow it to one state champion. But like I said, I understand why it's in place. Max, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of agree there. I come from Illinois high school basketball, but it's the same thing, 4 classes. And, if there's one thing that I'll say about this, it's overall, I always enjoyed like driving through towns, when everything was in single class and it was like, this little town, population 700 people. And, on their welcome to whatever sign, it's like state basketball champions 1970. It's like, that stuff's kind of cool because it actually like meant something. Now it's, everyone's kind of a champion, and, it's almost the way that sports are going these days. Everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a ribbon, and, no one feels too bad. Everyone has a chance to win. I just think I think it's better. Overall I know Illinois, the state tournament attendance has gone way down. Whether that has to do with the single class or the seating. I remember when we were my senior year, they do seating by your region, and we had such a powerful region compared to anybody else. We had 5 of the top 10 teams in our regional, which is we do regional, sectional, super sectional, then state in Illinois. That's how it goes. So basically, before the Sweet 16, you're playing eventual state champions, and it's just. It's kind of dumb. And, you basically have, I went to the state championship game that year and I was sick to my stomach because a team that we had beaten by 16 earlier in the year was playing this team from down south, and their tallest guy was a 6'2" white guy who was kind of fat. And I'm like, oh my God, I would have given him 50. And it's just one of those things. This is kind of dumb. They do it to, I don't know whether it's to save money for traveling expenses or whatever it is. It's probably money somewhere. That's how it always is. But I just think overall, people that love basketball and love, the tournament setting and March Madness, and the whole reason it's madness is because, the best survive. And I think the single class should be the way to go. And I would like to see it go back and, not have the whole everyone's a winner thing.
Yeah. And it's not part of this question, but regardless of class, I'd like to at least see the regular season matter. Like in Indiana, it's just a random draw for who you play in your sectional, and it's all based, like you mentioned, Max, regionally. So you often have, like in the Indianapolis metropolitan area, you have some of the best teams all in the same sectional, so they're going to knock each other out, and you're going to have some lesser teams from other sectionals advance that were nowhere near as good as some of the teams from the Indianapolis sectional. So it would at least be nice to see the regular season count for something, because otherwise, what are you playing for? Your record doesn't really matter if it's just based off ping pong balls and a draw. I feel like it could be seeded, whether it's 4 classes or 1, it should be seeded based on how you perform in the regular season. And I think that's another issue, another topic for another time, but something else I'd like to see in high school basketball.
Yeah, that, and every high school basketball program needs a shot clock. Like, let's get with the times. Come on. You don't need to see teams having a 5-point lead with 6 minutes left in the game and holding the ball.
Yes, sir.
It gives
no more
one,
keep
it gives
away.
One style of play.
No more 4 corners.
Yeah, maybe I'm biased because I was a dominant big in high school, and I didn't have the ball in my hands, and we had to get the ball back. I'm scoring 2s, and when they just it's just stupid. But thank you, Jade, for that question. Our next question is from Talon Bartenbach. He says, Max, I've admired your character from afar. My question is a little different. If you would give one word response to each of the words listed below, the first thought that comes to your mind. So this is kind of interesting. Thanks, Tom, for this question. So we'll say, I'll just read them off and go. So here we go. Future, bright, family, together, basketball, fun, serendipity, thoughtful, equality, 2017, Michigan, fight song, friend, Justin, Indiana, basketball, green, Devontae, introvert, not exciting. Thank you, Max, from Tom. All right, that's kind of a weird one there, but
that was kind of entertaining. Well, why don't you?
I hope it was. Yeah, feel free to shoot those.
Why don't you read those words off to me, and I'll give you my one-word response.
All right, here we go. Future.
Optimistic.
All right, it's the first word that comes to your head. You got to be quicker than that. Here we go. Family.
Love.
Basketball.
NBA.
Serendipity.
Fortunate.
Oh, that one's kind of tough. Equality.
Future.
All right. Michigan.
Lake.
Ooh. Friend.
Max.
No, I knew you were going to say that. Indiana.
Indiana. Home.
Green.
Grass.
Introvert.
Librarian.
Librarian. All right.
It just came to my mind. I can't explain it. I just got to say what comes to my mind. That's what came there. So I took a little longer than you did, but you're better at that game than I am.
Yeah, it's the first word that comes to your head, not the third word that you think. I know you did good though, but
serendipity's tough, man. I'm just trying to think.
I know it's like, ooh,
I'm trying to think of the meaning first before I think of the word that comes to mind. It's like,
yeah, I know.
Serendipitous, maybe. I don't know.
I'm thinking like serendipity, like calm pond or something. Serene, something serene. I don't know. Weird.
I wanted you to read those.
Yeah, feel free to send those. Are kind of fun, guys.
Just for the purpose of
Thomas, feel free to send another one. Feel free to send another one next week. That was good.
Yeah, just for the purpose of Lake Michigan is why I wanted you to read those to me, because that's the first thing I think of when I think of Michigan. But I recently saw Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg promoting their Daddy's Home 2, and they had to answer all these like complex questions with one word, and it was very entertaining to watch. So that's kind of fun for us. I'd like to do more of those in the future. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now it's time for our quote to note section of this week's podcast. We do it every Tuesday. Try to provide an inspirational, motivational, whatever quote's on Max and I's mind. We've been able to do it with a couple of guests, Tom Crean and Austin Hatch so far. This week it's just Max and I. Max, why don't you go ahead and lead it off with your quote to note for this week?
Yeah, I got one from Phil Jackson, Mr. Triangle Offense, the Zen Master. And he says, one of the most important characteristics of a leader is to listen without making judgments. I think, I like to think that's something I do pretty well, but I think it's also a very true quote.
In what way, Max, does that quote speak to you? I mean, have you found yourself in a situation, basketball-wise or otherwise, where you've been able to find yourself listening without making a judgment, or maybe you found yourself trying to make a judgment and trying to resist making that judgment as you listen?
Well, main thing I think about is the young guys with basketball. I mean, being a senior, you're looking at these young guys and you want to be like, what are you doing? You just be like, you're so dumb sometimes, but it's more helpful to kind of hear why they're thinking this thing. And, I think of one time that I tried to do that, though, actually was kind of wrong. We were in film, and it was actually OG made just a really dumb mistake defensively. And being one of the older guys in film would sometimes kind of try to, playoff coach and ask questions. And I was like, I asked OG, I was like, OG, what was, I was trying to go for hey, what was going through your mind there? I was like, hey, OG, what was going through your mind there? Were you thinking you should have done this instead, or what was, what was going on? And I think, I didn't quite say it as nice. I think I said it, OG, what were you thinking there? And he kind of took it as wow, Max is grilling me right now in front of coach. And he responded I don't know. And honestly, I was trying to be no, OG, really tell me, I want to help you make sure, so the next time you get in that situation defensively, you do the right thing. And I think by that point he was kind of flustered and he didn't say anything. And then after film, he was all mad at me. It's man, you put me on blast in film. Dude, no, honestly, I apologize. I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to, get you better. And so that was one time that quote kind of came into play. Listen, I was trying to listen, and he thought I was making some judgments too quick. But it was kind of a funny instance with that one.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can all learn from, because we all kind of have a tendency to read too far into what people are saying and assume that they're judging even when they're not. So that's a valuable quote and a valuable lesson for all of us. Mine this week, my quote to note, is going to be from Aristotle. It is during our darkest moments that we must focus to see the light. And this kind of goes along with what I wrote on albertsangle.com this week, just kind of an update on the site and how it's gone, and my journey with the site, how it started, and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's an important quote, because everybody, no matter who you are, will go through dark moments. And like Austin Hatch, we had him on the podcast last week. It's how you respond to those dark moments that really defines who you are and who you become, and not those dark moments themselves. So just the fact that you really have to focus to see the light when things seem the most bleak, or things don't go your way the way you expected it to go, or you don't get the job you wanted, you don't get the promotion, you don't get the recognition for whatever achievement you feel like you've made, and you're kind of down and in a dark place. I think it is really important to focus and see the light at the end of the tunnel, and see that you're really fortunate to have what you have, to be where you are, and that maybe that dark moment isn't as dark as you think it is when you focus and actually see the light.
Yeah, Austin had a good quote he said in our talk with him. It was, he really thinks life is 1% what actually happens to you, and 99% how you respond to it. And coming from a guy like Austin Hatch, that's very telling, because he's had so much in his life happen to him, with losing his mom, his dad, his stepmom, and his stepsister, as well as his first brother. That was, that's definitely something in his life that he could have gone down a dark road. But he's such a positive guy, and you see, he's taken that, and now he's going to do motivational speaking, and I think that's gone over time very well, and it's something that definitely makes me think of the Austin interview for sure.
Well, it's kind of natural human nature to assume that what happens to you determines how you respond to it. You kind of actively have to be of the mindset that I'm going to respond in this way, and get whatever happened out of your head and move forward as quickly as you can. And the longer you let it linger and think about it, the more it's going to determine your response to it. So I think he's absolutely right with that. And he's probably one of the best examples in the world of somebody that practices what he preaches with regards to 1% what happens to you, 99% how you react, because he's reacted in the best way possible. And I mean, it's a week later, and I'm still feeling really fortunate we had him as a guest and really inspired by his story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a great day today, and had a basketball game scheduled, and got there and found out we couldn't get on for like another hour and a half. So we were like waiting around. I was wasting an hour and a half, and I went to go grab something to eat, and I came back and found out I couldn't even get back on then. And actually, like my membership is expired, and I was like, oh God, I was like, okay, well now I got to go, and I might as well go get my workout in somewhere else now. And all I did was just eat a bunch of food, and visited my uncle's friend at a distillery this weekend, so I wasn't very healthy. I'm like, okay, I was really looking forward to that, and I guess I'll go to workout. Lost my motivation for that. And I'm like, I'm in my fantasy football league, and I need Tom Brady to go off tonight. And now he has 2 interceptions and is playing terrible. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have a great interview with Justin. We're going to have a great interview with Rick, and we're just going to make the best of that, because my past couple hours have been horrible. But, it's all about how you respond to it. And the fact I can laugh about that right now, I think says something. But it's tough. It's tougher said than done, because I wanted to, go punch a hole through a wall.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you played in pickup, but sounds like you didn't get to play.
Didn't even get to play. Yeah, it was. We were trying to plan this interview, and I was organizing with Justin for the interview and everything. And it was just a cluster. And before we get into our interview with Rick Bozich, talking about Indiana basketball and the history of basketball with Bob Knight and everything great, I just wanted to thank our friends at 10th and College, who I had the privilege of living there my super senior year, 5th-year senior, after transferring from Michigan. And I'd say it's the best living room I've lived in, a nice big open living room my entire college career, even back to Michigan. So you guys should definitely go check them out. Their leasing office is right there on 10th and College, easy enough to remember. So go check them out. They're signing leases for next year. Get down there soon. It's definitely worth it. Great location on 10th and College, next to everything you need to be, just a little bit away from the square.
All right, we're fortunate enough to be joined now by Rick Bozich, WDRB.com columnist. You can watch him on WDRB if you're in the Louisville area. Former columnist for the Louisville Courier-Journal, knows all things college football, basketball, covers Louisville, Kentucky, Indiana. Rick, great to have you back. How have you been, and how are things going after that Indiana-Louisville game on Saturday?
Things are going good. You buried the lead, man. I was the sports editor of the Indiana Daily Student. That was my first achievement. Traveled with the 1975, back when Coach Knight let the Daily Student travel with the team. Made 2 road trips. Almost got left in Iowa City once because I was late to a bus. So that's where it all began. But things are going good. The IU Louisville game was interesting. It was a game Indiana won. The last 3 minutes kind of went off the rails a little bit with turnovers and a few breakdowns. But it's been an interesting year, as it always is here. I've been here since 1978, and one reason I stayed is it's probably the best place in the country for college basketball, because I have exposure to Kentucky in the SEC, to Indiana in the Big Ten, to Western Kentucky and Conference USA. So it's a great place to be.
Yeah, there's something about that area. I mean, I never got a chance to play at Kentucky or at Louisville, but we got to see Louisville in the national championship when I was at Michigan. But there is that circle right there from Bloomington to Lexington to Louisville. I've never really been down in Kentucky and seen it myself, but it seems that every time you flip on the TV, or these are historic programs that just have diehard fan bases.
Yeah, I mean, year in and year out, I think ESPN, it's been 10 or 12 years running. This is rated the #1 college basketball market in the country. And it's not just for Louisville, Kentucky, and Indiana games. If there's a good game on TV, people in this area watch it. And the ratings for the Final Four every year are very high. And, they're all in the top 10 in terms of attendance. And I've always kind of said it this way: I could write a college basketball column in this market once or twice a week all year long, and people wouldn't complain. They would want more. People, this is what there's no pro sports team. So Kentucky and Louisville, and for IU fans in Southern Indiana, those 3 universities are their pro sports teams.
You're right when you say I did bury a lead. We'll definitely get to Indiana Louisville from Saturday, but now that you brought it up, I'd like to hear one of those stories from those days with the IDS following Bob Knight's team around. What was that like to be a student reporter and be on traveling with the team and a coach like Bob Knight? I mean, surely you have plenty of stories, but just that general experience, what was that like for a young journalist, and what have you taken with you from those days that maybe are still ingrained in you and you learned valuable lessons there early on?
I was really a shy person back then and kind of timid. And I worked for the Daily Student with a guy by the name of Bruce Newman. We were seniors, and he was really good. He was so good, he went straight from the Daily Student to Sports Illustrated. That's how good he was. And I went from the Daily Student to the Anderson Bulletin. But I got to go on 2 road trips, and that was the year when they won every Big Ten game. I think they were 29-0, and then they got beat by Kentucky in the regional championship game because Scott May had the broken arm. But that was basically, Coach Knight says, or has said on a number of occasions, that the 75 team might have been better. They had Steve Green and Laskowski, and a little bit better offensively, not as good defensively. But I guess 2 of my favorite stories were, that was the first year they got on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It was a picture of John Laskowski, and Coach Knight hated the article because Curry Kirkpatrick, who's a Hall of Fame writer at SI, wrote about him and talked about how when IU played in a Rainbow Classic out in Honolulu, how they dined on bread and water and they never went and saw the beach. And he said when he got mad, he howled at the moon and all this crazy stuff. And Knight hated the article. First trip I went to was to Iowa, and I got off the bus and grabbed my bag, and he put me in a headlock and started giving me a Dutch rub. He said, "Who's your favorite sports writer?" And luckily I said, "Well, it's not Curry Kirkpatrick." And he said, "That's the right answer." I said, "It's Bob Hamill." And Hamill was there on the trip. He's the famous IU sports writer who still comes to the games. But later on that trip, they played, back then the Big Ten played Saturday, Monday games exclusively. And so we didn't have a paper on Sunday, and the Saturday night game in Iowa City, I didn't have to write anything for the Daily Student. And it was in the old Iowa Fieldhouse, which had an upper deck where there was almost like a track. And after the game was over, I talked to some players, and I went upstairs to the SID office to get final stats. I looked down on the floor. The players were still out there talking to their parents and friends and stuff. And I ducked my head back in the SID office, and they were listening to like another Big Ten game. I think it was involving Purdue. And back then you had to win the Big Ten to go to the NCAA tournament. So the result I thought was pretty important. So I figured I'll listen to this game for a few minutes. And then when I go down there, I can tell them who won. So I got too caught up in the game. I looked out the second time and they were all gone. And I ran out in the parking lot, and the bus was pulling away at Iowa without me. And luckily the bus driver saw me and kind of stopped. And I walked up to the bus and pounded on the door, and Coach Knight was sitting in the front seat, and he kind of looked at me and shook his head, and the bus went forward 20 feet like they were going to leave me. And then it stopped again, and the door opened, and he was sitting there in the front seat, and I got on the bus, and he goes, "Where the hell were you?" And I started to explain, and I got about 2 words out of my mouth, and he said, "I don't give a shit where you were." He goes, the Indiana Daily Student almost got left in Iowa City. Now go sit your ass down. And the players just roared because for once somebody else was getting chewed out other than them. So that was my favorite Bob Knight story. And, Buckner and Scotty May and Kent Benson and Steve Altfeld, who's the team doctor, who I still talk to all the time, they still laugh about that story because they remember it.
Well, first off, I got to clarify the Dutch rub. I believe you're referring to what's called a noogie today, right? Where they give
that's a noogie,
on. Yeah, noogie. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know when
knuckles to the head, man. Knuckles to the head.
Either way, it doesn't feel good no matter what you call it. Quick question. So you're talking about Knight and kind of his antics, and I know the Indiana faithful have all sorts of opinions on Knight, but I have a curious question for you. You got to see him in his prime. I wasn't exactly old enough to see him in his prime. So if everything would have gone just fine and there hadn't been any sort of animosity between the playing the politics of Indiana and all that, and and he was, let's say you just set him down. He was the coach of Indiana in 2017, and there was no issues. He just coached the way he did, like he just stopped coaching back when he did at Indiana, and he picked it up right now. What do you see? How do you see him working at Indiana these days? What would he do? How would he integrate the social media and stuff? I mean, just like as a coach, what do you think his biggest powers would be?
His biggest challenge would be, social media, because he liked to control the message, so much back then. There was a whole season where I think some people wrote some stuff he didn't like, and he froze them out, and there was a whole stretch of a season where he didn't even do any press conferences. He would just give 2 sentences to the SID, and they type it up and distribute quotes on a sheet of paper. So, I mean, it's like, if you're not going to do things the way I want it, I'm going to do it my way, not your way. If you could get rid of all that noise and all the extraneous stuff, he would never be able to deal with, AAU basketball, handlers, or, whatever they call those, I don't even know the word that they use for the intermediaries between teams and players and street agents and all that stuff. He would flip out of it. From the era where high school basketball was king, and he and Bob Hamel would actually go to high school games together and watch players, and come back and decide who Indiana was going to recruit. So if you could just make it a world where there was no distractions, he'd be great. But that's one thing that kind of led. If you look at IU basketball in the 90s, things started to slip because a lot of players, he couldn't recruit them anymore. He couldn't get the best of the best.
Yeah. As we transition more toward present day, I mean, a lot of people have referred to Archie Miller as a Bob Knight type of coach, a more tempered, modern era Bob Knight, as far as his approach to coaching and his reaction to certain results. I think the Duke game is a perfect example. The way he answered that question from Zach Osterman after the Michigan loss, and the fact that it's no moral victories. What have been your impressions from Archie so far, from your interaction with him early on, what you've seen from him as far as his ability to grow this team as a coach through the early part of this season, and just what are your overall thoughts on him as a coach at Indiana to this point?
I mean, I've been impressed with him. He's a serious-minded guy. He's very serious about basketball. He's serious about his craft. He's not going to get up there in a press conference situation and crack jokes or tell one-liners or try and entertain people. He answers the questions, and he doesn't really give you coach speak. He does try and answer the questions in a thoughtful way. And I think the connection, the comparison to Coach Knight comes into the fact that some of the things that he values are the same things that Knight valued, which is don't have careless turnovers and forced shots or contested shots, so value every possession. And I think he's also more oriented towards believing that you can win with a consistent level of defense rather than a consistent level of offense. And those seem to be the two things he's working the hardest to try to establish at Indiana this season. And that's at times, I think, been a challenge for this team, because that, in my opinion, hasn't been what the emphasis was the last season or the couple seasons before that. And Tom Crean obviously was very successful. As you know, Max, you guys won the Big Ten regular season championship, which a hard thing to do back in 2016, made it to the Sweet 16 and lost to a Carolina team which could have won it all. And same thing in 2013, but Archie's going to do it a different way, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny watching that Louisville game and hearing Jay Billis talk about, he was comparing Crean and Miller a little bit, but he was more just saying it's just completely different styles, and that's really what it is. It's Crean wanted to go fast, Archie wants to go slow. Crean played more of a pressure defense, Archie plays a pack line. Crean could tolerate some turnovers if you were really picking up the energy and the pace. Archie's the exact. It's really interesting how they kind of went almost 180 when it comes to coaches. Would you agree with that? Yeah,
and I don't think that was any accident. I mean, I've followed Indiana basketball really all the way back to the late '50s, early '60s, but covered it since I was in college in the mid '70s, and because of Coach Knight's success, I think there's a very significant group of the fan base that was never going to be tolerant of the carelessness with the basketball unless there was a championship. And I think that was a thing that last season was created part of the atmosphere around the program, is that people really got angry at the high level of turnovers, and they got upset about the poor defensive performance at times. And that's why it seemed like so many games, like last season, like almost every game was a referendum on Coach Crean and his future. And I think that was part of the reason that there's a group of the IU fan base that was never going to embrace that style of basketball completely. I mean, I don't think they were.
When we get back to Indiana Louisville on Saturday, I mean, first of all, completely different from what we would have expected when that contract was signed. I mean, it was a deal when Pitino was the coach at Louisville and Crean was the coach at Indiana, and obviously neither of those guys are still there. So it's kind of odd to see that game being played at the Yum Center with two new faces on the sidelines for those two teams. But as far as the game on the floor, did it play out kind of like you expected? Anything surprise you, stand out from either team in that game that surprised you a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of what you're saying, it's hugely different than everybody thought it was going to be, because just a year ago there was Crean against Pitino, and two more dynamic personalities involved. And if you really know some of the background, they weren't really the Mutual Admiration Society. I know that their battles went all the way back to Conference USA when Tom was at Marquette, and they battled over some players. Malik Williams and Ray Spalding, two of Louisville's more significant contributors, are guys that Tom Crean really tried to get at Indiana. But in terms of the way the game played out, I thought it was pretty much the way that I thought it would play out. I think Indiana had a better chance to win than I thought they were going to going in the game, and it's hard to believe they couldn't make a three-point shot at all in the second half. And I don't know if it's coincidental or it's an issue with Indiana's ability to guard the three-point shot, which has been a problem all season, going back to that freak show against Indiana State where they made 17 of their first 22 threes. But you got Malik Williams, who'd made 3 threes all season, and he hits 3 in a row in the first half. Some of that is just luck, and some of it is him being open. And then you got Raymond Spalding in the second half, makes a huge 3, and he'd made 3 threes in his whole career, and he's a junior. So for whatever reason, the three-point shot seems to hurt Indiana defensively, and then offensively it hurt them in that game, because that's the one thing this team lacks, and it doesn't really have to be a guy at the same athletic ability as Oladipo or Troy Williams or Yogi, but they don't have a guy who is either at either guard position or the small forward position who can just take the ball and go make a play or make a shot. That's, to me, the biggest vulnerability of this team.
Yeah, and it seems like there's kind of a mixture when you talk to Indiana fans about Indiana's senior guards and Newkirk and Johnson. And both of them have had up and down performances this year. I thought Johnson was great against Duke. Obviously, he didn't score against Louisville. So the ups and downs of the senior guards and trying to balance that with playing some of these younger guys like Al Durham, more minutes, that these guys that are going to be in the program and in Archie's system long term. Whereas it may be a little difficult for seniors like Johnson, who played 3 years under Crean, to learn how to play this system on the fly. Like when we talked to Ed Schilling on one of the episodes of this podcast, he mentioned that it is sometimes harder for a senior to learn a new system than it is a freshman, because he's used to it being a certain way for 3 years and a freshman's coming in new anyway. So what has been your take as far as Indiana's backcourt play, trying to balance the youth and getting them experience in valuable situations and playing your veteran guards and guys like Newkirk and Johnson?
I kind of go back and forth. It's been an area. None of those guys have really been consistent. I think people are harder on Robert Johnson than they should be. I mean, he's good on the defensive end. He's improved his turnover thing. He's just, for whatever reason, hasn't made shots yet this year. I think he'll at some point maybe relax and make some. He looks like a guy who has maybe lost a little confidence in his ability to shoot from the perimeter, and he might be asked to, try and penetrate more and get to the rim more than he did under Tom Crean. But he's playing with a different group of guys. I mean, when he played with Yogi Ferrell, and James Blackman, I mean, he was like the third point of concern for the defense. Now he's more of the first point of concern, so that's a harder situation. Newkirk, to me, is played about who he is. I mean, he's a guy who is, he's a point guard, but he's not really a great break you down and dish and distribute guy. He's okay at that. He's okay shooter, I think, when he's wide open, but he's just not going to beat you off the dribble and get a shot. He is who he is. And Devontae Green seems like he should be the guy eventually who's the best all-around player, but he, more than anybody else, in my opinion, needs to, embrace more of what Archie wants to do, because he is the guy who tries to make the spectacular play instead of just the basic play at times or as coaches say, like, just hit a single, don't try and hit a grand slam. And Durham has played better than really I thought he was going to play. He had a bad game against Louisville. He had 5 turnovers, which he'd only had 5 turnovers all season until that game. But he's been good driving the ball. He's an inconsistent shooter. I don't think that's really the strength of his game. It'll probably get better, but he's long, and I think Archie likes him because I think he thinks he's committed more so to playing defense and playing Archie style. And I think as the season goes along, he'll get better.
Yeah, I have a question for you. I mean, going from, just the Big Ten in general, you're looking at the basketball this year and you see that overall, a lot of teams are, Indiana's getting blown out by Indiana State. Wisconsin's 4-7 now. Minnesota, they're in a tough one right now with Drake. I don't know if you guys are following that at all, but
they've lost back-to-back games, right? Nebraska and Arkansas.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just checked it. Minnesota pulled out a 1-point win versus Drake, so that could have been a bad one too. But I think overall, I mean, one of my takes is people may be down on the Big Ten, but how important is it, from what you've seen from over the years? And obviously, I can say this a little bit is, the teams change completely from December basketball to March. How much do you think these Big Ten teams battling out, and this, for instance, a young team that Indiana has under a new system, they can? What's the hope? They're 5-5 right now. The hope against all these great teams like Michigan State's and Purdue's they have to play, but just battling out and getting tougher. How much do you think they can improve on this and maybe finish on the top half of the conference?
Yeah, I think they can. I mean, I think it'd be real helpful to them to beat Notre Dame. I think that they need to win a game against one of these better teams on the schedule. Their best win at this point is Iowa, which is, probably bottom 5 team in the Big Ten. But if they could beat Notre Dame, I think it would do a lot in terms of their own self-confidence and belief in what they're trying to achieve. And then they got 3 home games, and they need to win those, and those won't be easy. I mean, Fort Wayne beat them last year, and it was Youngstown, I think, is one of them. I don't remember who the third one is, but as you know, those are different kind of games because the students aren't there, and it's a different atmosphere in that Assembly Hall. So I don't know if you get quite as much bump from the fans. But then they start out in the Big Ten with at Wisconsin and at Minnesota resume Big Ten play. I mean, with 2 road games, and so. If they could win one of those 2 road games and beat Notre Dame, I think it'd be a big plus. But I think they have more potential to improve than other teams because they are working some young guys in, and it's a new coach and a new system, and there's opportunity because, as you mentioned, I think Michigan State's clearly the best team in the Big Ten. I think Purdue's clearly the second best team. At some point, I would think Minnesota would, reassert itself and be the third best team. But Northwestern, well, I saw tonight they were winning at 1.74 to 19. They've kind of struggled. and Penn State's probably sneaky good, but I could see this team finish anywhere from maybe like 6th or 7th would be their ceiling, and then their floor would probably be 11th or something. I mean, they should be able to finish ahead of Rutgers and Nebraska, and I would think Illinois. Ohio State has been the surprise team to me.
Hey, it's funny. I said this a while ago. I mean, obviously, when I transferred from Michigan to go to Indiana, we won the Big Ten. Spike did the same thing the year after, and Purdue wins the Big Ten. And then Andrew Dockett actually transferred from Michigan to Ohio State. And we're like, all right, streak's over. It's no way Ohio State wins it. And then I'm watching it, and I'm like, get out of town. Ohio State's right there, tied at the top, 2-0. Oh, man, that would be.
And they blew out Wisconsin at Wisconsin, which I know that Wisconsin struggled and had some injuries, but that rarely happens. Yeah,
no kidding. I mean, it's going to be interesting. To talk on your piece just about Indiana needing just one of those wins. I'm a believer that if you can kind of close out a game and see it happen, and kind of feel it happen. Like if they would have beaten Duke, I think they could have beaten Louisville. And it's just it's just about getting over that hump and to see these games where they're up on Duke, they're up on Louisville. This would be a different season. People would have already forgotten about Indiana State and be like, this is a new team. They've already done it, but it's tough because I felt this a little bit last year with it. Just they're so close and they just need. You need that game changer, the Yogi Ferrell or the Trey Burke that we had at Michigan, or just someone just to kind of take over at the end. Obviously it helps to make free throws too, which has proven to be a pretty big struggle point of the Hoosier season so far. But I'm still optimistic. I think, if they can beat a team like Notre Dame, who's shown a lot of vulnerability so far, that could push them over into the Big Ten season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the big challenge against Notre Dame will be that they can make threes, and considering the problem Indiana's had guarding the three this year, they're going to have to hope that Notre Dame has a little bit of an off night, or they find some way to shut that down. Because with Farrell and Gibbs and what's the other, Pfluger, they've got some guys. Colson can even make threes. They're going to spread you out and try and beat you from the perimeter and drive you. But I don't think Notre Dame has the inside game to match up with Juwan Morgan and Deron Davis. And we saw how good Deron Davis was against Duke, and he was effective against Louisville, and Louisville with Mahmoud and Spalding are a pretty former team inside. But I agree with you. But the common thread of the Duke and Louisville games was the game was close until the last 3 or 4 minutes. But then when it was to execute and really have somebody who could make plays or get baskets on those last 6 or 7 possessions of the game, Indiana hasn't developed that yet. And whether that needs to be one of the guards or Colin Hartman starts doing it, or Justin Smith develops into that guy, I don't know who, but somebody needs to be the guy to say, okay, I'm going to get it.
Yeah, and it's just speaking on Notre Dame, I'm looking at their lineup here to kind of just check out the matchups, and I think from what I've seen from Juwan so far, if he gets put on Bonzi, I think that's a good defensive matchup for him. I think Juwan, he's long enough to kind of get in his face for some shots, and he's good at defending Bonzi's game. I know I'm not. When we played Notre Dame, that was one of my worst first halves of the year. I was guarding Bonzi and best player that year. It was Demetrius Jackson, doing all this stuff, and it was Zach August too. Bonzi was kind of an afterthought, and I got put on Bonzi, and I think Bonzi had like 17 or 19 that game, and I'm just like, hang on a sec, I can't be getting beat this bad by there's some guy that's not even at the top of the scouting report. But he has a really unique game. He has zero neck, which is the weirdest thing, and he's all arms. I swear, it's the most bizarre thing to guard because he doesn't look like he should be a crazy athlete or anything, and you're trying to read him, but he's so kind of crafty with what he does, and obviously I'm 6'8", and I have the normal 6'8" wingspan to go with it. Of these guys that I've played with, the OG Ananobis and Thomas Bryant, it's the 6'8" and 6'11" with the 7'2" and 7'6" wingspans. And, Bonzi's the same way, so he has a unique game. But I'm really looking forward to seeing Juwan guarding him. A little nervous to see if Deron has to, because I don't see him moving that well, but. I think it's a decent matchup. I mean, they don't have the length that Louisville has. They don't have the length that Duke had inside, and I think they can expose some points, especially in the post.
Regardless how you played,
Yeah,
though,
they got a whole
Max.
week to prepare. I know it's finals week. They got a whole. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Rick. I was just going to say, regardless of how poorly Max may have defended Bonzi Colson, that was the game that changed your guys' season, Max.
That's
No
right.
question.
That's what I was going to say. That game, I mean, they were down in the second half, and people were booing. I was sitting up in the upper deck there at Bankers Life, and there was some of that turnover stuff going on, and there were people booing, and that was the year. Didn't you guys lose the 2 games in Hawaii and got blown out by Duke? And I think people were ready to write that team off.
Ready to turn.
And that game turned it around. And I'm not saying there'd be anything as dramatic this season, but that's the kind of game that, first of all, it'd be great for their resume if they end up being an NCAA tournament bubble team. And secondly, it's a great win in the locker room of, you guys can sort of exhale and talk about that rather than some of the come close games or the other games.
Yeah, I think, just one last thing about that, it's amazing, having played and kind of understanding the psychology that goes into it. If we would have lost to Notre Dame, I could easily see us, getting down on ourselves, and obviously, the people would be even harder than they were on Crean, and who knows, it could have been, things could have gone the other way real quick. But I think that game right before Christmas is so vital because, it kind of, for me, it was always like, you got to go home for Christmas and everyone's going to ask how things are going, and you hate to come off a loss and be like, oh yeah, we just lost and all this. You want to build people's excitement. So yeah, that before Christmas game, it's always fun to win those.
Well, and the flip side of that was last year. I remember last year they played up there and lost to Butler, and that Butler game to me, in a lot of ways, for Indiana is always a no-win situation. If you beat Butler, you're supposed to beat Butler. If you lose to them, then it's like I can't believe you can't beat Butler, and I know Butler's been good recently. Secondly, then after that, they lost the first Big Ten game to Nebraska at home, and then they went back up to Indianapolis a week later and got beat by Louisville. And I think that kind of set the tone for the rest of the season in many ways. So I agree with you. I think it's a big game Saturday.
Switching gears a little bit here, Rick, just how important do you think Romeo Langford is, regardless of what school he picks, but since we're Indiana-based, how important would he be to Indiana, and how essential do you think he is to Archie Miller's next couple of years here at Indiana if Indiana is able to secure a commitment from one of the top kids to come out of this state and one of the top kids in the nation in 2018?
I think it'd be very big on 3 different levels. One is that they need a guy who, in that position, they need a shooter. They need they need an off guard. They need a bigger guard who's athletic, who can go get points the way he can. So he fills a need. Secondly, Archie Miller said it in his introductory press conference that they need to get the best players within the state of Indiana. They've got Infinity, they got Demezy Anderson, one from the north, one from the center part of the state, and now if they got one from the south, that would sort of be in 1 year in confirmation of that. And thirdly, Duke and Carolina and Louisville and Kentucky have all been scratched from the list, so now you're down to Vanderbilt and Kansas. So in many ways, the competition that you thought was going to be there back, several months ago, the most significant competition has dropped by the wayside. And to lose them to Kansas would be one thing, but I think if they lost them to Vanderbilt, rightly or wrongly, a lot of people would be, I think, a little bit stung by that. And he could end up going to Vandy because he's buddies with Darius Garland. I know that Bryce Drews put a tremendous push into this, but those are the 3 most significant things in terms of Romeo.
Yeah, and I think it does help them a little bit when you talk about Vanderbilt and what's gone on recently with Garland and kind of the backdrop there. Politically, it may not look the best if Romeo were to go there at this time, but a month, 2 months pass, and people tend to forget about that kind of stuff. But it seems like, and I said this earlier in the season when they were really struggling before they had shown the signs that they showed against Duke and against Louisville, that this fan base could slightly start to turn on Archie if they miss on Romeo. And I don't feel that way anymore just because of the improvement that we've seen. But given the schools, like you mentioned, that have fallen away. And given the fact that it's Vanderbilt, that's really the real contender with Indiana, given how hard Archie's gone after him, I think it would have to be considered a huge disappointment if they miss on him, especially since they did not get Garland and Curtis Jones is gone, so they got an open scholarship. So it just seems like if he committed, that round out a really nice class, and if he doesn't, then you leave some holes for speculation about the future. What do you agree or disagree with that?
If they don't get Romeo, I think they still have a need at that position, because if you look at the roster for next year, they really only have 3 guards, which would be Durham and Tennessee and Devontae Green. So I'm not really sure how comfortable you can be going into a season with only 3 guards. If you have any kind of injuries at all, you're really in a bad situation. So I think Romeo is obviously plan A, B, and C, but if they don't get him, they'd have to, in my opinion, get somebody else for the backcourt. And I don't think anybody will turn or get upset if they don't get him. It's only year 1, and they've closed so much ground. I mean, I don't think hardly anybody thought he was even considering Indiana until the coaching change was made. So just to make it to the Final 3 has been tremendous progress. And Romeo's a pretty rare talent, and he's got a lot of options. And if he ends up going to Vanderbilt, it'll be a little bit of a head scratcher, but that's his call.
Do you think? And just looking at this whole recruiting thing, and I one name pops up to me a lot thinking about Romeo and going to Vanderbilt. It's Ben Simmons going to LSU. He was more comfortable there. But do you think these top tier athletes that decide, hey, I'm going to go with the smaller school that I trust, that I can be the big name at, but LSU didn't even make the NCAA tournament that year. Do you think that's in his mind at all? Like the Ben Simmons type players, and hey, sometimes I think Beeline did a interesting thing about showing how important winning is. Obviously, coaches try to stress that, but he did it in the terms of the NBA one time, and he said he brought up the stats of the percentage. Obviously, the teams are better, but he brought up the percentage of teams that go deeper in the NCAA tournament, the percentage of the team that eventually gets drafted in the NBA, and it's significantly higher. Like if you make the NCAA tournament, or if you make the NCAA championship, it's like 30% or something wild plays in that game. And the talent's top tier, but incrementally, even you think of the Cinderellas and stuff. It all depends what you do in March. People, that's Tom Crean had an issue there. That's why he seemed to get fired. Everyone knows that March is important, but even when it comes to the players and recruiting, I think people kind of undervalue. You can put up incredible numbers, but for the most part, if you're not on the primetime TV and you're not going against the players that are going to be playing against you in the NBA, scouts aren't quite as apt to go for you. And it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Vanderbilt was good a few years ago, and Stallings was there. They had that one really good team with Jenkins and Zealy and like Jeff Taylor was. They're one of the 2 teams back in 2012 when he won the national championship. Indiana beat him, and Vanderbilt was the other team that beat him in the SEC tournament championship game down in New Orleans. Vandy's, they got a 15,000 seat arena. It's more of a metropolitan, it's a town with an NFL team and an NHL team. It's a different vibe than IU, which is a college town. So I don't really know how important that kind of stuff is to Romeo. To me, he'd be taking sort of a leap of faith with Bryce Drew. I think he got to the NCAA tournament at Valpo, but they're not very good this year. They're worse than Indiana. They've lost to Middle Tennessee, and they've got 2 or 3 other bad losses. And he'd be putting all of his faith, I think, in this other freshman class of Garland, and then there's another kid named, I can't pronounce his name. It's like Shitu or something. There's another 5-star prospect from out east. So I don't know if that's the attraction there. Whereas going to IU, if he goes to IU, he's got a chance to sort of be remembered across the state or about the IU fans for a long, long time. And you saw that Saturday night when he played in Southport in that tournament that he scored 40-some points or whatever it was against Fort Wayne North, where there was a huge contingent of Indiana fans who were there cheering his name. And I predict that he won't go anywhere this year where there'll be Vandy fans showing up cheering his name.
Yeah, that's very true. Rick, we'll get you out of here on this. I know you're busy. It's late. We appreciate you taking all this time. Kind of switching gears for this last question, and it's something that you and I have talked about many times, but just as the media world continues to change and so many options for individuals and human beings to consume their time and content to watch, view, listen to, whatever, how have you found it now that you've had a few years doing TV, transitioning from only writing columns? Now you're writing columns, you're doing TV hits, you're doing TV segments, maybe special editions, whatever it might be, but just trying to balance all of the different things. Do you feel like it's forced you to dilute maybe what was your top talent when you only had to focus on the column, or do you feel like it's made you a more well-rounded reporter and columnist and analyst altogether because you've been forced to do more things? How do you kind of look at that?
That's a great question, Justin. I think it's the good part of it is it's kept me motivated and made me feel or be younger, because you always have to adjust and adapt, and it's like there's a million birds in the nest trying to put their beaks up in the air to get recognized, because there's so many people fighting for the attention of readers. So you always have to remain aggressive and competitive. But you're doing so many different things that it's harder than it was back in the day when I worked at the newspaper and wrote 4 columns a week to really feel like I can sit back and craft a really good column or a really good story. It seems like these days, I don't know if there's as much value on that as there used to be. In some entities there is, but I don't think on a daily basis you can do that. And I guess I think back to the days of, the really big time sports writers that I used to be around when I first got in the business, that were known for their ability to sort of put stories together and write descriptive stories. That's not valued as much now. Now it's more like snark or, headlines that lure you in, or people taking sort of positions that are a little bit outrageous just to get you to pay attention to them. So it's definitely a different world than it used to be, and I'm not necessarily convinced it's a better world. It's better in some ways because there's, more voices, and that's good, but it's a challenge for sure. My wife, I remember when she told me she thought I had the easiest job in the world because all I did was, write 4 columns a week and go walk the dog or go to the park or whatever it is. And now it seems like I'm working a little bit every day, or a lot every day. So that's a long way to answer your question.
Yeah, but it's a good answer, Rick. And to sign you off of here, I think you've been one of those from the previous generation of newspaper writers who really took the transition head on and did a really good job adapting to social media, not just shunning it, and adjusting, growing your following, and trying to adapt in the best way you know how. And like you mentioned, that all the headline readers and the people jockeying for attention, you've remained true to who you were as a writer then. And I think that really resonates with people when they actually go through all the bull crap. They'll find the good stuff, and you always provide it. So I've appreciated that about you over the years, and appreciated your friendship, and I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to Max and I.
I'm happy to do it. I have known you for a long time and always respected you and the work that you've done, and I'm glad you're back into doing stuff like this. And as I said before we started recording to Max, I appreciate him from 1 year I covered him when he was at IU, and during those few games when the locker room finally actually got open, we got a chance to go in there and actually talk to guys and relate to them, which is the way it used to be. I mean, that's when I was at IU, the locker room was open. That's how I sort of developed relationships with guys like Quinn Buckner and Steve Green and Bobby Wilkerson and Ken Benson and those guys that, I wish there was more of that stuff, but that's my main point was that, Max was always thoughtful and accommodating. And as writers, we appreciate that stuff instead of, people that just sort of give you the rote answers. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me on. I've listened to your podcast with Austin Hatch. And there was one other one, and you guys are doing a good job, and I'm subscribed now, so I'll continue to listen.
Appreciate it, Rick.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. That'll do it for another episode of Earn Your Stripes. Special thanks to Rick Bozich for joining us. Really good conversation about Indiana basketball and basketball at large. Also, a special shout out to Cardinal Spirits, the presenting sponsor of this podcast. You can check them out at cardinalspirits.com. Max, have you ever been around a guy who's, he's in the kitchen making a mixed drink and it's taking far too long? He comes back, he's missed something from the game, and you have to pause it to try and catch him up. How did Indiana get the lead? Who made that shot? How did it affect my betting or fantasy team? I can't stand those kind of people. Well,
yeah,
yeah,
you were waiting for my response. All right, sorry, go ahead. This is why we aren't live.
Guess what, Max?
What?
Cardinal Spirits has the answer. Their spirits are so flavorful and high quality, you don't want to hide them or cover it up. For game days, try Bramble Screwdriver with Bramble Black Raspberry Vodka and Orange Juice, or a hot hopscotch with Songbird Coffee Liquor and hot coffee. For night games, you might try the Lake House Spiced Rum and a Coke, or you can mix the rum with apple cider just to mix it up a bit. You don't want to be the guy who pulls out a cocktail shaker during the game. Just keep it simple and classy. Make it back before the end of the media timeout so you don't miss any of the game. Cardinal Spirits, the presenting sponsor of Earn Your Stripes. Again, visit them at cardinalspirits.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Earn Your Stripes. We'll be back on Thursday. Enjoy your week.